Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. What skills were needed to write the Book of Mormon? Was it a miracle that Joseph wrote it, or are there naturalistic explanations to explain this? Dr. Brian Hales is going to dig into that question, and we're going to find out more about Joseph's background and education, and whether he really had the writing and/or oratorical skills to do this. Check out our conversation.
And that's where we maybe can go next, is to a look at what Joseph's skills were in 1829 based on the historical record. And if we ask what composition skills, I already kind of mentioned that he really had no training in composition. But the interesting thing is, if you look at quotations from people who knew Joseph, both friend and foe, there's not a single one who later or at the time was saying Joseph was smart enough to do this. Nobody thought that. And words like ignorant and illiterate are used by his family. They are used by critics. And I did talk with one critic once, and he said, well, his family wanted to make the Book of Mormon look like a miracle, so they wanted to make him look dumb. And those that were criticizing him, well, they didn't want to give him credit for being really smart, so they just made him look dumb too. So that was how they explained away all of the historical accounts that present Joseph as not being highly educated or necessarily intellectually gifted.
Now, I want to key in on that word illiterate. I had a conversation with Colby Townsend. I don't know if you know Colby.
I do. He's a good guy.
One of the things he mentioned was illiterate in Joseph Smith's day didn't have the same connotation that it has in our day. In our day, somebody who's illiterate cannot read, cannot write. They're illiterate. So they have no reading or writing skills. Whereas in Joseph Smith's day, that's not what illiterate meant. It meant he was uncultured. He hadn't read Shakespeare. He hadn't read other things. But he had read the Bible, and he clearly knew the Bible extremely well. And he could write, and so illiterate in Joseph Smith's day doesn't have the same connotation that it does in our day. Is that your understanding as well?
I think I read that same post or same paper.
It was an interview with Colby, yeah.
Oh, or I listened to your interview. That's what it was. So very good. And I don't think we need to get hung up on one word, illiterate. I imagine everything that Colby researched is accurate, but people weren't just saying he's illiterate. They're saying he's ignorant, that he was poorly educated, not very well educated. And if you look at what's out there, you said Joseph knew the Bible very well. We have two eyewitnesses who said he didn't. Now, those eyewitnesses are just cast aside by the naturalists because they don't like what they're saying, but they were there. It's Emma and David Whitmer who are telling us Joseph didn't know the Bible that well. And so, these claims, there's contradictory evidence, okay, except we really don't have anybody saying he was very much knowledgeable of the Bible. It's an assumption based upon the Book of Mormon by the naturalists. You can't go to the historical record and find somebody who said in 1829 Joseph was an expert on the Bible. There are no quotes that say that. So we have to be careful there. But there's several who said Joseph didn't go to school when he could have. He could write. We know that he wrote one letter, and he dictated some revelations before the Book of Mormon was finished. But as far as having any real experience with this, you cannot document it from the historical record. If we look at his oratory skills, then one of the most popular quotations is that in 1823, Lucy Mack Smith remembered Joseph had been, he would have stories for the family. He occasionally would tell them about the ancient inhabitants of America. And he would talk about the animals that they rode and their clothing, which unfortunately those details aren't in the Book of Mormon. She was remembering inaccurately if he is in fact talking about the Book of Mormon and what was going to be in it. But the problem is nobody else remembers Joseph telling these stories. He wasn't getting a PhD in composition and rhetoric and working as a professional storyteller. He's telling his family some stories that in his context and in Lucy's context came from the angel Moroni. And so to say that because he's doing this, therefore he could he could dictate the Book of Mormon 6 years later is really not justified. It's a leap of logic that deserves attention by anybody who wants to go there. And nobody really does. They just say he was telling stories in 1823, therefore he could dictate the Book of Mormon. Again, something that deserves attention.
And I think that's kind of what Dan Vogel says, because there was the 4-year gap where supposedly, or allegedly, or whatever the word you want to use, that he was supposed to go back and get the plates every year from 1823 to 1827. Vogel says, well, he could have been working on the Book of Mormon during that, for not having anything written down, but in his mind been working on some of those plots. Is that a fair statement? Or?
Yeah, I think the naturalists, almost all of them today, think that during that period from 1823 to 1829, Joseph is doing something behind the scenes that nobody notices, because nobody does notice. Family members don't remember it. They don't remember him disappearing for long periods of time to do something that we could interpret as putting that together. The problem is, and this is probably as good a place to talk about it as that, well, let's come back to it. But if he's thinking about the Book of Mormon, he's either got to write it down or he's got to commit all of the details to memory. And we'll look at some of those details of the Book of Mormon here in a minute. But that either one of those is a difficult challenge. And not something that's just done by, let's see, today I'm going to, memorize 5 plot lines and make up 5 names and things like this, and then commit them all to memory so that they will be available for me to put into a perfectly wordsmith sentence, as I'm dictating here in a few months or years. That is something that has never been done by a genius that I can find. Maybe somebody has a genius who's dictated a book that way, but I couldn't find it. But I want to mention one other person, Orsimus Turner, and Bill Davis quotes him. Mm-hmm. He talked about Joseph's involvement in the juvenile debate club. And it was occasionally. And he's also the one, Orsimus Turner is the one who remembered Joseph was a passable Methodist exhorter. And people will inflate these things. In fact, Bill in his PhD dissertation talks about Joseph as being
Bill Davis.
What did I say?
You just said Bill. I wasn't sure.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bill
Davis.
Bill Davis, right, William Davis. He says that Joseph was an adept debater. And yet the only person to remember Joseph even being involved with the debate club was this one quotation. And lots of people want to say, well, he was involved as a Methodist exhorter. Well, that would have only been for about a 6-month period in 1824 to 25. He never even joined the Methodists, never was a member of their church. So Orsimus does mention these skills, a passable exhorter. He would occasionally help with the debate club. But the one thing that these naturalists don't always tell us is on the page right before he mentions these two things, he also tells us that Joseph Smith was possessed of less than ordinary intellect. So whatever skills Joseph had in exhorting or debating did not really impress Turner that much. And we just need to be transparent. Let's tell us everything that Turner's saying, because he didn't think Joseph even had a normal intellect.
Is that a nice way of saying he was dumb?
Well, you can put it in whatever context you would like, but these are statements that I run into that people pull up and say, see, Joseph cognitively had the skills because he was an exhorter, or he was a debater, or because he told stories to the family. But when you get in and put him in context, it doesn't describe Joseph as this super genius with the ability to do what he did by dictating this stream of words in a 3-month period. Now, what I've done, and this has been kind of a fun thing, and you're going to post a link to the PDF here, but I'll just hold this up to the camera. Mm-hmm. I've got a list of the characteristics, literary characteristics of the Book of Mormon. And these are the things that Joseph Smith would have had to come up with if he is the author and creator of the text. And just now keep in mind that he's dictating this as a 23-year-old farmer with a district education that I believe would have been about equivalent to a 3rd grade. And I know Bill Davis's article says he had 7 years of opportunity, but whatever opportunity he had, when you look at what people are saying about him and what even 6 years in a district school would equate to today, I think 3rd grade education is probably pretty close. Go 4th grade if you want. But the Book of Mormon has nearly 270,000 words. It's interesting that the average sentence length, there's almost 7,000 sentences, but the average sentence length is almost 40. What that means is he's talking, and then you get an embedded clause or an embedded idea, and then you come back to the main. And it's more complicated than just dictating a lot of shorter sentences. People, you'll find in creative writing books, they're saying don't write 40-word sentences. You'll get the reader confused. And to be able to dictate it this way makes it more difficult. It's at an 8th grade reading level. If you plug the entire 1830 version of the Book of Mormon into these analysis processes, it comes out at about the 8th grade, some as high as the 11th grade reading level. So some people believe Joseph had the skills to write it, but Don Bradley pointed out it's questionable whether he even had the education to be able to read at that level. The dialect is interesting because if you're going to dictate a book, you would feel most comfortable using the dialect that you use every day. If I had to dictate a book, I'd want to use the English that you and I are using right now. Joseph didn't do that. As you know, Stan Carmack and Royal Skousen have shown that it's in an earlier form of English. It sounds like the King James Version. They say it's even earlier than that. But he's dictating it in a different dialect, again, which would, I think, increase the difficulty. The number of unique words in the Book of Mormon is right around 5,900. Do you think that's high or low? I'll quiz you here, Rick.
High or low compared to what?
Compared to average novels of the day
Well, I would suspect that would be high. That's what I was expecting to say.
Actually, it's low or in the middle.
Oh, okay.
So it's not impressive. That's the thing. I entered that in here because when I'm gathering these literary characteristics, I want to get everything. I'm not trying to just find the ones that are wow factored or things like that. And the number of unique words in the Book of Mormon is not remarkable, say, just for the record. Now, but what is interesting is there are dozens of very difficult vocabulary words, college level vocabulary, that aren't in the Bible. And so to be able to use these words in the sentences of the Bible and use them correctly, and they are used correctly, you would expect Joseph or the author would have needed to be kind of practicing these. Go back to your 5th grade vocabulary class, remember? You'd write the word down and use it in 3 sentences and that kind of thing. There's dozens of fairly difficult words in the Book of Mormon that aren't in the Bible that would have required, I think, some special attention. Now, the number of invented or original pronouns. These are pronouns in the English language that didn't exist until the Book of Mormon was published. Most of them are names of people, but they're names of places, money, vegetables, even honeybee, like Deseret, that's an original word to the Book of Mormon. I have 170. There are lists that push that number higher, but when I looked at some of them, I crossed them off because I think they're out there already. But each time one of those words come up, Joseph would have had to spend a little time making up the word. They don't just necessarily make themselves up. So cognitive energy would have been needed to do that. While Joseph is dictating, as you know, there are chiasms. And Dan Vogel admitted there's at least 20 to me, and there are people who have counted over 400. And besides those, there are alternates. And an alternate is where you say the words the sentences, the topics A, B, C, D, and instead of inverting them like you would in a chiasm, D, C, B, A, you would go forward again with A, B, C, D. Those are alternates, but it's a pattern phraseology, parallel phraseology. There are hundreds of those as well. And so imagine yourself dictating this text, and mentally you're having to format into a pattern these topics. Okay, even as you're wordsmithing the actual sentences. I think that would increase the difficulties.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Brian Hales. In our next conversation, we'll talk about the skills required to write the Book of Mormon, and we'll look at convicted forger and murderer Mark Hoffman's attempts to do so.
Well, Hoffman was very skilled.
Yeah.
But the difficulty he had producing the actual text could be an indicator to us how difficult it would have been for Joseph Smith to produce the actual text, even if handwriting isn't part of the equation.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe for just $5 a month at patreon.com/gospeltangents, and you can hear the entire interview before everybody else. If you'd like to watch the entire video for just $8 a month, you can either subscribe on YouTube, Patreon, or my website, gospeltangents.com. Just click the yellow subscribe button, and I'll add you to our Gospel Tangents Insiders group so that you can see entire videos. For those interested in a PDF transcript, you can subscribe at either Patreon or on my website. For just $10 a month, I'll send you a PDF as soon as it's complete. If you'd like a copy of the paperback as well as a PDF, just sign up for $20 a month at either Patreon or my website, gospeltangents.com. Of course, you can buy individual transcripts at amazon.com and just do a search for Gospel Tangents interview, and you can see all the things that we have there. Don't forget to support Gospel Tangents with an awesome t-shirt like one of these. You can subscribe at Apple Podcasts at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. Get our latest updates at facebook.com/gospeltangents. Also, you can get our Twitter updates at Gospel Tangents. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got more of our great videos. Thanks again.